As usual, if you like these stories or it felt meaningful to you, feel free to like, share, and comment your thoughts below, as well as subscribe to our channel. It could be a huge support for our work. Now, let's just enjoy the stories.
The heavy silver platter trembled against Sarah's sweaty palms. Across the mahogany table, the most feared man in Chicago adjusted his cuffs, entirely oblivious to the crosshairs on his chest. She leaned in, pouring the iced water, her lips barely moving. "Run when I drop the tray," she whispered. In the underground world of Chicago's elite, there was a golden rule for the staff at the Grand Meridian Hotel. You are the furniture. You do not speak unless spoken to, you do not make eye contact, and above all, you do not listen. For 3 years, Sarah Jenkins had been the perfect piece of furniture. She was the premier bottle service girl for the hotel's 42nd floor penthouse, a suite that didn't exist on any public elevator directory. She kept her head down because she had a massive target on her back. Her younger brother, Caleb, had racked up a crippling gambling debt with the South Side outfits. Sarah was working triple shifts, funneling every $100 tip she made directly to a man named Knuckles, just to keep Caleb's legs unbroken. She couldn't afford a conscience, and she certainly couldn't afford to get involved in the politics of the men she served. But that night, the air in the penthouse was thick enough to choke on. The room smelled of aged scotch, imported Cuban cigars, and a sharp, metallic undertone that she had long ago learned to associate with adrenaline and fear. Seated at the center of the custom velvet-lined poker table was Vincent Castellano. Vincent wasn't a loud, brash mobster. He was a 3-4-year-old phantom. He had inherited the Castellano syndicate after his father's car mysteriously detonated on Lakeshore Drive 3 years prior. Under Vincent's control, the syndicate had gone completely corporate. He wore bespoke charcoal suits from Savile Row, carried himself like a Fortune 500 CEO, and possessed a pair of cold, steel-gray eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Flanking him were the men who supposedly kept his empire running. To his left sat Arthur Sterling, a corrupt city councilman whose sweating, flushed face betrayed his nervousness. To his right was Tommy the Rat Rizzo, Vincent's underboss, a man who smiled too much and wore too much cologne. Across from them was the guest of honor, Richard Blackwood, the head of the rival Irish faction. They were supposedly negotiating a treaty over the distribution ports in the city. Sarah was standing in the shadowed alcove near the kitchen doors, waiting for the signal to clear the appetizer plates. That was when she heard it. The service hallway behind the penthouse was a labyrinth of pantry storage and staff exits. She had slipped back there to grab a fresh bucket of ice. As she approached the alcove, she heard hushed, urgent voices. She recognized Tommy Rizzo's raspy Chicago accent immediately. "Is the detail in place?" Tommy whispered. "They're waiting in the stairwell," an unfamiliar, gravelly voice replied. "3 men, silenced automatics. We just need the signal to bypass his personal security." "When the waitress brings out the Dom Perignon for the toast at 11, Tommy said, his voice dripping with malice. "The second she pops the cork, the distraction is set. Blackwood will hit the deck and your boys breach the double doors. Put 2 in Vincent's chest and 1 in his head. Make sure it's messy. I want the rest of the families to know the Castellano era is dead." "What about the waitress?" the hitman asked. "Collateral," Tommy replied coldly. "Dead girls can't testify." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Her breath hitched in her throat, and she clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle any sound. She backed away, step by agonizing step, until she was safely in the main kitchen prep area. She leaned against the cold stainless steel counter, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Collateral. If she walked out there at 11 p.m. and popped that cork, she was going to be caught in a crossfire. If she refused to go out there, Tommy would know she had heard them, and she'd never make it out of the hotel alive. She could try to run right now, slip down the service elevator, and disappear into the night. But what about Caleb? The Castellano family technically owned the bookies her brother owed. If Vincent died tonight, Tommy Rizzo took over. Tommy was ruthless. He wouldn't honor the payment plan she had set up. He'd kill Caleb just to make a point. More than that, she remembered a night 6 months ago. A drunk, handsy senator had cornered her in the cloakroom. Before she could even scream, Vincent Castellano had materialized from the shadows. He hadn't raised his voice or thrown a punch. He simply placed a heavy hand on the senator's shoulder and softly said, "If you ever touch an employee in my establishment again, you won't leave with your hands." Vincent had tipped her $1,000 that night and ordered a private cab to take her home. He was a criminal, a killer, a boss of bosses, but he had looked at her like she was a human being. She glanced up at the industrial wall clock. It was 10:54 p.m. The head chef, completely unaware of the impending slaughter, pushed a massive, ornate silver tray toward her. On it sat 4 crystal flutes and a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon resting in a bed of crushed ice. "Showtime, Sarah," the chef grunted. "Don't keep the bosses waiting." She stared at the tray. It looked like a tombstone. She took a deep, shuddering breath, smoothed down her black skirt, and gripped the handles of the heavy silver platter. She had no weapon, no backup, and no real plan. But she knew she couldn't let that man die. The walk from the kitchen to the private dining room felt like a march to the gallows. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the low hum of masculine conversation hit her. The tension in the room had spiked since she last left it. Councilman Sterling was sweating profusely now, violently dabbing his forehead with a silk handkerchief. Richard Blackwood was leaning back in his chair, a smug, relaxed smile playing on his lips that gave away his anticipation. Tommy Rizzo was staring intensely at the door, waiting for her. "Ah, the champagne," Tommy announced, his voice carrying a false joviality that made her stomach churn. "Gentlemen, to new partnerships and the changing of the guard." Sarah approached the table. The tray was so heavy her forearms burned, but her hands were remarkably steady. Fear had burned away, leaving behind a hyper-focused clarity. She could see the subtle bulge of a shoulder holster beneath Tommy's jacket. She noticed that Vincent's 2 personal bodyguards, who usually stood right behind him, had been subtly repositioned by Tommy to the far corners of the room, blocking their own lines of sight to the main doors. It was a perfect trap. She stepped up to Vincent's right side. He didn't look up, his attention seemingly focused on the cards laid out in front of him. "Allow me, Mr. Castellano," she said softly, her voice perfectly level. She leaned over to pour a glass of iced water from the pitcher already on the table, bringing her face mere inches from his shoulder. "Run when I drop the tray," she whispered. For a fraction of a second, the universe seemed to stop. Vincent didn't flinch. He didn't widen his eyes. But the knuckles of his right hand, resting on the velvet table, turned bone white. He shifted his weight, subtly planting his feet firmly against the hardwood floor beneath the table. He heard her. He believed her. She stood back up, moving to the center of the table with the silver tray. "Elidocus PM. Pop the cork, sweetheart," Tommy ordered, his hand slowly sliding into his jacket. "Let's get this celebration started." She gripped the neck of the dark green bottle. She twisted the wire cage. Her eyes darted to the heavy double doors of the suite. Through the frosted glass, she could see 3 dark shadows moving into position. She looked at Vincent. His steely eyes finally met hers. He gave a micro-nod. Instead of popping the cork, she hoisted the heavy silver tray high into the air and hurled it directly at the hardwood floor with every ounce of strength she had. The crash was deafening. Glass shattered like shrapnel, ice exploded across the room, and the heavy silver rang out like a gunshot. "Now!" Vincent roared. Chaos erupted in a fraction of a heartbeat. Vincent violently kicked the heavy poker table upward, flipping the 200-pound piece of mahogany backward onto Tommy Rizzo and Councilman Sterling before they could even draw their weapons. At the exact same moment, the suite doors were kicked open. 3 men in dark tactical gear stormed in, raising suppressed submachine guns, but their target was no longer sitting in his chair. Pff, 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 pff. The suppressed gunfire chewed through the leather upholstery of Vincent's empty chair, sending feathers and leather flying into the air. Sarah had dropped to her knees the second the tray left her hands, covering her head as bullets whizzed through the air, shattering the panoramic windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. The cold night wind howled into the room. Vincent's bodyguards finally reacted, returning fire. One of the hitmen went down, clutching his throat. Suddenly, a strong hand gripped her arm like a vice. She was yanked off the floor, her feet barely touching the ground as she was dragged backward behind the overturned poker table. It was Vincent. His custom suit was covered in dust, and a sleek, black Glock 19 was now firmly gripped in his right hand. "You're coming with me," he barked, his voice cutting through the ringing in her ears. "What?" "No, I need to. Rizzo saw you warn me," Vincent snapped, firing 2 blind shots over the top of the table. A scream of pain echoed from the other side. "If I leave you here, they'll cut you to pieces to find out what you know. Move." He didn't give her a choice. Still holding her arm, Vincent shoved her toward a hidden, flush-mounted door disguised as a wood-paneled wall, a private panic exit she never knew existed. He slammed his palm against a biometric scanner, and the panel hissed open, revealing a dark, narrow stairwell. He pushed her inside and followed, the panel sliding shut behind them just as a volley of bullets hammered against the other side of it. The silence of the stairwell was shocking compared to the war zone they had just left. The only sound was their heavy breathing and the faint, muffled thuds of gunfire above them. "Down!" Vincent ordered, switching a flashlight on his gun to illuminate the concrete steps all the way to the basement garage. "Do not stop." They flew down the stairs. Her black waitress heels were slowing her down, so she kicked them off, running barefoot down the freezing concrete. They descended 42 flights. Her lungs burned, and her legs felt like lead, but the terror kept her moving. When they finally burst through the basement doors, the underground parking garage was eerily quiet. Vincent moved with lethal precision, sweeping the area with his weapon before leading her to a sleek, black, armored SUV tucked away in a VIP corner. He unlocked it remotely and shoved her into the passenger seat before sprinting to the driver's side. The engine roared to life with a deep, guttural growl. As they peeled out of the garage, bursting past the security barrier and merging onto the rain-slicked streets of downtown Chicago, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a cold, crushing reality. She was sitting barefoot in a getaway car with the most dangerous man in the city. Her job was gone. Her normal life was over. Tommy Rizzo knew her face. Vincent kept his eyes glued to the rearview mirror, checking for tails, before finally glancing over at her. His chest was heaving, a small cut bleeding above his left eyebrow. "You just started a war, Sarah Jenkins," he said, his voice dangerously low. She looked at him, shivering in her thin blouse. "I saved your life." "You did," he agreed, shifting the car into a higher gear as they tore down Lakeshore Drive, the city lights blurring past them. "Which means your life now belongs to me." The armored SUV tore through the labyrinthine shadows of Lower Wacker Drive, the concrete pillars flickering past like the teeth of some massive, subterranean beast. Vincent drove with one hand draped over the steering wheel, his eyes darting between the rearview mirror and the dark tunnels ahead. The silence in the cabin was suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the tires on the damp pavement and her own ragged breathing. "Where are we going?" Sarah finally managed to ask, her voice trembling. She wrapped her arms around herself, hyper-aware of the fact that she was barefoot and wearing a blood-spattered hotel uniform. "Off the grid," Vincent replied curtly. He reached into his tailored jacket, pulling out a sleek, disposable burner phone. He dialed a sequence of numbers entirely by memory, waiting for a click on the other end. "It's done." Rizzo made his play. Blackwood was in on it. "Clean the penthouse and lock down the south side ports. Nobody moves cargo until I say so." He tossed the phone out the window into the rushing waters of the Chicago River as they emerged onto a deserted bridge. They arrived at a brutalist, industrial warehouse district near Pilsen. Vincent bypassed the main roads, guiding the SUV into a narrow, rusted loading bay that looked completely abandoned. The heavy steel doors ground shut behind them, sealing them in total darkness before harsh, fluorescent lights flickered to life. "Out!" he commanded. She followed him into a freight elevator that groaned as it ascended to the top floor. The doors opened to reveal a massive, minimalist loft. It was a fortress masquerading as a high-end apartment. A sprawling mahogany desk sat in the center, flanked by racks of servers, a wall of monitors displaying various security feeds across Chicago, and a glass-encased gun safe. Vincent walked straight to a wet bar, poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal glass, and downed it in one smooth motion. He leaned against the marble counter, his steel-gray eyes locking onto hers. The cut above his brow had stopped bleeding, but it gave his sharp, aristocratic features a dangerous edge. "Now," Vincent said, his voice deadly calm, "you're going to tell me exactly how a bottle service girl knew my underboss was going to put a bullet in my head." She swallowed hard. "I told you. I overheard Tommy in the service hallway. People hear things all the time in my world, Sarah." He stepped closer, the sheer physical presence of him making the room feel smaller. "They usually run the other way. They don't walk into a room full of loaded guns and drop a 200-pound silver tray to save a man they don't know. So, I'll ask you again. Why?" Tears of pure exhaustion and terror threatened to spill, but she forced them down. "Because if you die, Tommy takes over the books. And if Tommy takes over the books, my brother is a dead man." Vincent frowned, his head tilting a fraction of an inch. "Your brother? Caleb," she choked out. "He owes $90,000 to a loan shark named Knuckles. Knuckles kicks up to Tommy Rizzo. I've been making payments every week, handing over every dime in cash just to keep them from breaking Caleb's legs. I knew if Tommy seized power tonight, he wouldn't care about my payment plan. He'd clean house. Caleb would be collateral damage." Vincent was perfectly still for a long moment. Then, he walked over to his massive desk and pulled out a heavy, leather-bound ledger. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the columns of handwritten numbers. "Knuckles," Vincent murmured, almost to himself. "I explicitly outlawed street-level predatory loans 3 years ago. It brings the feds to our doorstep. We are a logistics and union operation now." He looked up, a cold, terrifying realization dawning on his face. Rizzo wasn't just planning a coup tonight, he's been running a shadow economy behind my back. He turned to his monitors, typing rapidly on a keyboard. Surveillance footage from various underground clubs and shipping yards flared to life. "Rizzo needed me dead tonight because I ordered a full audit of our offshore accounts starting tomorrow morning at First American Fidelity," Vincent said, his jaw clenching. "He's been bleeding the syndicate dry, laundering the stolen money through illicit street loans like your brother's. If I saw the audit, he was a dead man walking." He panicked. Her heart sank. "Does that mean Caleb?" "Caleb isn't just a debtor, Sarah," Vincent interrupted, grabbing a fresh magazine for his Glock and slamming it home. "He's a loose end. If Rizzo is cleaning house to cover his tracks, he's going to liquidate all of his illegal street books tonight. He'll erase the evidence. And that includes the people who owe him." "We have to get to him," she gasped, panic seizing her chest. "He's hiding out in a motel in Little Village. Please, Vincent." "I saved your life." Vincent slipped into a heavy, black leather jacket, hiding the weaponry strapped to his chest. He stopped at the door, turning back to look at her. The icy detachment in his eyes had melted into something far more intense. "You saved my life," Vincent agreed softly, "and I protect what is mine. Let's go get your brother." The Starlight Motel was a rotting structure of peeling yellow paint and flickering neon lights, tucked away in an alley that the city had long forgotten. It was pouring rain when they pulled up, the heavy drops drumming against the roof of the armored SUV. "Stay in the car," Vincent ordered, retrieving an assault rifle from a hidden compartment under the back seat. "No," Sarah fired back, her voice surprisingly steady. "He won't open the door for you. He's terrified. He'll think you're one of Tommy's men." Vincent stared at her for a second, calculating the risk. "You stay exactly 1 step behind me. If shooting starts, you drop to the floor and do not move. Understood?" She nodded. They moved through the downpour, the rain instantly soaking her thin blouse and flattening her hair against her face. Room 114 was at the far end of the exterior walkway. As they approached, Vincent raised his fist, but before he could knock, the door violently shattered inward. A massive man with a shaved head and brass knuckles practically welded to his hands stepped out, dragging a bruised and bloodied Caleb by the collar of his shirt. It was Knuckles. 2 more armed thugs followed close behind him. Well, Knuckles sneered, stopping dead in his tracks as he spotted them. He wiped rainwater from his eyes, his brutal face twisting in shock as he recognized the man standing in front of him. "Mr. Castellano, Tommy said you were dead." "Tommy is a liar," Vincent said. His voice didn't rise above the sound of the rain, yet it carried a lethal authority that made the 2 thugs behind Knuckles instinctively take a step back. "Let the boy go." "Can't do that, boss," Knuckles grunted, pulling a heavy revolver from his waistband and pressing it to Caleb's temple. "Orders are orders. Tommy's the new head of the table. He said to burn the ledgers and bury the debtors." "Caleb!" Sarah screamed, lunging forward, but Vincent's arm shot out like an iron bar, pinning her behind him. "Tommy Rizzo is a dead man," Vincent said smoothly, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. The rain washed over his face, making him look like a phantom of vengeance. He stole from the family. He broke the commission's treaty. By tomorrow's sunrise, every crew in Chicago will have a bounty on his head. If you pull that trigger, Knuckles, I will personally ensure your final hours are an anatomy lesson. Knuckles' hand shook. He was a street-level enforcer, used to bullying desperate gamblers, not standing face-to-face with the apex predator of the Chicago underworld. He looked at the 2 men behind him, but they were already lowering their weapons, their loyalty fracturing under Vincent's icy glare. I didn't know he was stealing," Knuckles stammered, the revolver wavering. "Drop the gun and walk away," Vincent offered, his voice a dangerous whisper. "You have exactly 3 seconds before I take your head off." Knuckles swallowed hard. He looked at Caleb, then at Vincent's unwavering aim. Slowly, he uncocked the revolver and let it clatter against the wet concrete. He shoved Caleb forward and backed away, raising his hands before turning and sprinting into the rainy darkness with his crew. Sarah rushed forward, dropping to her knees and pulling Caleb into a fierce embrace. He was battered, his lips split and his eyes swelling shut, but he was alive. He sobbed into her shoulder, his hands trembling violently. Vincent stood over them, his weapon lowered, but his eyes scanning the perimeter. "We need to move. Rizzo will send a real hit squad when he realizes Knuckles ran." 2 weeks later, the penthouse of the Grand Meridian Hotel had been completely refurbished. The bullet-riddled mahogany was gone, replaced by sleek, modern glass and steel. Sarah stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, wearing a tailored designer dress that cost more than she used to make in a year, looking out over the glittering Chicago skyline. The underworld had violently realigned itself. Tommy Rizzo had been found in the trunk of a car at O'Hare Airport, his ambitions permanently silenced. Councilman Sterling had suddenly decided to take an early, very quiet retirement. The syndicate was stronger, more unified, and entirely purged of dissent. Caleb was safe, relocated to a quiet town in the Pacific Northwest with a new name and a clean slate, his debt erased from existence. She felt a warm, heavy hand rest on the small of her back. She didn't flinch. She leaned into it. Vincent stood beside her, smelling of rich espresso and expensive cologne. He handed her a crystal flute of vintage Dom Perignon. "Are you missing the tray?" he asked, a rare, genuine ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Not even a little," she replied, turning to face him. "Good," Vincent said softly, reaching out to tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "Because you're never serving anyone again. From now on, you sit at the table." She looked into the steel-gray eyes of the most dangerous man in Chicago, a man who had burned his own empire to the ground to protect the girl who had dropped a silver tray. She took a sip of the champagne, the bubbles dancing on her tongue. "I think I can get used to that," she whispered. If you loved this heart-pounding mafia romance and want to hear more thrilling, real-life stories filled with dark secrets, shocking twists, and hard karma, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow drama lovers and subscribe to the channel so you never miss out on the suspense. Ring that notification bell, and I'll see you in the next crazy story.